unsettled weather throughout the rest of the week. We do have our eyes on this area of low pressure that could bring some slightly stronger winds, particularly in the south and west as we head Tuesday night into Wednesday. So do just keep up to date with the forecast in regards to that. Otherwise, enjoy your evening. Bye-bye.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello and welcome. This is Calvin's Common Sense Crusade with me, the Reverend Calvin Robinson, on your TV, online and on your wireless. Today we will be discussing the fact that more than a quarter of churches no longer hold a weekly Sunday service. And I'll be joined by Charlie Peters to discuss the media coverage surrounding the government's plans to clamp down on grooming gangs. Plus, in the duel, we'll be asking whether Christian culture is being de-Christianized. With me today is my sidekick Emma Webb. What's your take on that, Emma?
By all sorts of... Some of them are unchristian, some of them are actually anti-Christian.
And my nemesis today is Erica Thorne.
I blame Catherine.
On brand.
Thank you for that. We'll be back after the news with a duel.
Good evening, it's just gone 7 o'clock. I'm Bethany Elsey with your top stories from the GB Newsroom. A 12-year-old boy accused of murdering a grandmother in Sheffield has been remanded into secure accommodation. 60-year-old Marcia Grant was hit by her own car outside her home in Green Hill on Wednesday. The family released a statement describing her as a warm and loving character and a pillar of the community. The boy, who can't be identified due to his age, is due before Sheffield Youth Court again tomorrow. Nicola Sturgeon has spoken out for the first time since her husband was arrested, saying she has not been questioned by police. Former SNP Chief Executive Peter Murrell was taken into custody on Wednesday as part of a police investigation into the party's finances. He was later released without charge. The former First Minister said she intends to get on with her life and with her job.
Much as there are things I might want to say, I'm not able to do so, other than to say that, as has been the case, there will continue to be full cooperation. The last few days have been obviously difficult, quite traumatic at times, but I understand that is part of a process.
The NHS Confederation is warning 250,000 appointments could be postponed due to a 4-day strike by junior doctors next week. Medics in England will walk out immediately after the Easter bank holiday weekend in an ongoing dispute over pay. The Department of Health and Social Care insists the action must be called off before any negotiations can take place. More than 850 community and charity representatives from across the country have been invited to the King's Coronation on the 6th of May. 450 recipients of the British Empire Medal have been asked to attend the service at Westminster Abbey. Meanwhile, 400 young people will watch from St Margaret's Church. Marine Constable Dawn Wood from Essex Police told us she received her invitation by email.
I initially opened it, I thought, who on earth is playing a joke on me? There's going to be, I'm going to find out that I'm going to turn up to the palace and I wasn't really supposed to be there. But yeah, I've made a few phone calls since and yeah, so excited. Absolutely. I just can't believe that I've been selected. What an honour.
And the comedian Gareth Richards has died after being involved in a car crash last month. The 41-year-old was the former radio co-host of Frank Skinner. He suffered serious brain injuries in the accident and passed away yesterday evening. Comedian Jason Manford has paid tribute, describing him as a wonderfully inventive and funny comedian, but more importantly, a kind and thoughtful man. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB+, radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News.
I apologise for the double whammy of me today, but I hope you enjoyed that Easter special. Yesterday, after church, I went down to Trafalgar Square to watch a live performance of The Passion of Jesus, hosted by the Wintershall Estate, and we had on the show last week. It was an amazing day, it really was, to share in the commemoration of Good Friday with tens of thousands of other Christians in the middle of London. We love to see it. I didn't, however, spot Mayor Sadiq Khan. Nelson's column wasn't lit up with Christian symbols, and there were no Easter lights on Piccadilly Circus, and the fourth plinth was still of that murderous anti-white revolutionist. So the surroundings were far from perfect, but we should celebrate whatever wins we can these days. And seeing people able to publicly demonstrate their witness for Christ was significant, especially during the Paschal Triduum. On Maundy Thursday, we saw Christ prepare us for his temporary departure as he washed the feet of his apostles and ate the Last Supper, instituting both sacraments of the priesthood and the Eucharist. And Good Friday, we saw his death on the cross for our sins. Today, of course, is Holy Saturday, or Easter even, when we wait for his return whilst he descends into hell to free the lost souls, opening the gates of heaven to them and to us if we repent and believe. Tomorrow is the holiest of holy days for Christians, when we celebrate his resurrection for our salvation, the day he demonstrated to the world that he is not just truly God, but also truly man. So instead of a political monologue today, I'd like to invite you to join me in the Lord's Prayer, in whatever language comes naturally to you. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Welcome again to this Easter weekend edition of the Common Sense Crusade. Easter is, of course, a commemoration of Christ's resurrection. And I say of course, but I wonder how many people will be considering the meaning of Easter this weekend. Attendance at Easter church services had dropped by 66% in just a decade. And only 46.2% of people in England and Wales identify as Christian these days. Britain is no longer a majority Christian nation, and the impact is felt when, as happened this week at Oxford, a college reportedly cancelled its annual St George's Day dinner in favour of an Islamic iftar. That despite a Magdalen College spokesman saying all major Christian festivals are celebrated. That all brings us to this week's Duel, and to debate this topic, I'm joined by my duelists, my sidekick Emma Webb, and this week's nemesis, founder of Novora Media, Aaron Bastani. Emma, has Christian culture been de-Christianised?
I think so, and I think that there's something very telling in that quote that you just read out there from Magdalen College, which is that they celebrate every major Christian festival, implying that St George's Day is not a major or important Christian festival that's worth celebrating. I think all you have to do is take one quick look at, I mean, this is speaking of the Church of England, not of the majority of Anglicans or even the majority of Catholics or Protestants or otherwise. But the Church of England in particular, I think, has become de-Christianised. You just have to take one quick scroll through their website and you can see that it's absolutely shrouded with corporate speak rather than traditional Christian language. There's an abandonment of traditional doctrine and actually, I think, an attitude almost of sort of cringing towards a lot of the traditions of the church. And part of this, I think, is, you know, that bringing in extraneous ideas from outside of Christianity. You see it within theology, with bringing in critical race theory, other progressive ideologies. But there's an awful lot going on. But I think actually the reason why we're seeing this decline in Christian numbers is because people don't want to attend church services that aren't meaningful, where you feel that the clergy don't really truly believe in the gospel. If people are attracted to Christianity, it's because they're attracted to the truth. And I think that this sort of cringing, self-deprecating attitude that the church has taken on, as well as a sort of lack of belief in its own ideas and taking on all of these external, predominantly secular ideas, or you might say some new religious ideas, I think that that is part of the problem and that is contributing to the decline.
A lot to break down there. It sounds like Emma thinks it's doctrinal, it's theological, it's also community, and the language that's being used. What do you say, Aaron? Is Christianity being de-Christianised?
I think there's a lot there. I mean, I had a few separate points which perhaps you guys wouldn't necessarily agree with. The first is we live in a capitalist society. And whether or not you're a fan of that, there's a gentleman called Karl Marx who had some very important insights.
Someone's a strong word there, Aaron.
Yeah, well, you know, it's those are my words, not yours. You know, about 170 years ago, he wrote a book called The Communist Manifesto. Now, why am I talking about that? From the perspective of religion, there's a great phrase. He says, all that is holy is profaned, all that is solid melts into air. All that is sacred is profaned, all that is solid melts into air. Which is to say that in a capitalist system, everything becomes for profit. And I think most of your viewers will understand that, this idea of the subordination of everything that we really value becoming about profit and about marketing and about public relations and about big business. So that's not a new insight, it's a relatively old one. So I would say that's part of the bigger picture here. But then I think also, you know, look, my wife is Maltese, she's from Southern Europe. And I suppose that there's a difference here between Catholicism and Protestantism. But that is a country like here, which has adopted over time more secular mores. There have been changes with regards to legislation, abortion and whatnot, divorce, and yet at a community level, people still take Saints' Days incredibly seriously. Young, old, believer, non-believer, although it's important to say that believers are far more likely, you know, there than here. This is a very secular country, has been for a very long time, but it's interesting that that community aspect of faith still plays a huge role, particularly in Southern Europe. And it's interesting, as Brits, we look at Italy, we look at Spain, we look at Malta or wherever. We go, isn't this charming? Isn't this wonderful? Yeah. We have the exact same thing here, but we don't seem to value it when it's at home.
But what's the difference there? Because they're all capitalist countries too.
No, it's a really good point. I think the Catholic faith. I mean, look, this is a bit above my station on a Saturday. There's a gentleman called Max Weber who said that Protestantism was the perfect religious faith to go hand in hand with the rise of capitalism after the 16th century. But park that, very complex. I think Catholicism as a faith is probably a little bit better immunised from this idea of everything being subordinated to profit and commercialisation. Not perfectly so, but a little bit better.
Yeah, that does seem to be part of the problem, doesn't it? That authority. The Catholic Church has this magisterium, it has its papal infallibility, it has protections, guards against wokeness. And it does seem to be wokeness playing its hand here. If we look at the northwest of the country, Lancashire, Merseyside, Copeland, Cumbria, all roughly still 66% Christian. It's London and the southeast where, Tower Hamlets, for example, 22% Christian. No surprises there. So it's not just wokeness, there are other elements at play. But do you think wokeness is...
Well, I think actually I agree partially with what Aaron said, that liberal society does have a sort of bent towards atomisation, and that is a problem. And I think possibly one of the reasons why you see less of a decline in the north is partly because it's sort of reasonably more homogenous. It's not one, with the exception of some of the major cities, it's not a kind of like cosmopolitan centre. And so those sorts of areas always hold on to traditions longer, no matter what country you're in. But I do think that the church has given up on it in many ways. I think the Anglican Church specifically has given up on sort of the core of its own beliefs and traditions, and perhaps is looking towards social justice ideas and progressive ideology, particularly critical theory, and in some cases particular strands of theology, liberation theology, that draw on critical theory. So this is getting very complicated. But I think that they may see in that, misplaced, they may see in that the church's salvation, as it were, that they think that this is going to get bums on pews, when in reality, what really attracts people, and I think they're mistaken in thinking that young people 30 or under, are attracted to this, when the reality is, at least in my anecdotal experience, that what young people are really thirsty for is to be, preach the gospel in a way that is sincere and authentic and not cringing and ashamed. I think a lot of people, when they say that they're Christians, they say it in a kind of cringing way, as if they have to be apologetic about it. And we see that en masse as a society, culturally. I think and particularly with institutions, there's either a sort of like cringing hesitancy to recognise the Christian roots of our country or institutions, or there is an active sort of iconoclasm and vandalism towards it. And I think that is, again, comes out of a misplaced sense of guilt. And I think they truly do believe that if they look to these new ideas, that they will find their salvation in those ideas rather than in the ideas of the gospel.
Again, so much packed in there, Emma. I want to call Aaron up on two of these points that you raised. So firstly, the iconoclasm and the whole embarrassment about being Christian. So you two both prayed the Lord's Prayer with me just then. I'm thankful that you did. But were you embarrassed about doing that?
Not especially. I mean, it's important to say, millions of people... I was saying earlier, actually, I did it every morning at school and in primary school as a child. Yeah. And my presumption is that's still a common event. I mean, perhaps it isn't. I mean, I am unfortunately getting old, so that's. But so for me, it's a very commonplace, everyday thing. I think it's also a very powerful message, even if you don't necessarily believe in God. I think the idea of forgiveness is the key message of the gospel, and it's an incredibly powerful and potent message. And for me, the big takeaway, and it's exactly what you were saying, really, and I think it sounds like a trick is being missed, really, by more powerful people, particularly in the Church of England, which is that young people, all people, frankly, but young people, are desperately in search of meaning and desperately in search of a sense of higher purpose in life. And we see this, by the way, throughout, commercial culture. We see it with journaling, meditations, and all this stuff.
The New Age stuff.
Yeah, humans have sought to meet those needs since forever. And actually, the old ways, were very effective at doing it. And like I say, forgiveness, the idea of forgiveness is such a powerful one for me. And I think whether or not you believe in God, whether or not you're a practicing Christian, I think it's an extraordinary transformational way to live your life.
And I do want to ask you about social justice as well, because I assume that you and I would disagree on approaches to social justice, but I think we'd probably agree on the fact that the church should be looking at its own history in social justice, in feeding the poor, in almshouses, in charity, all these things, setting up hospitals, schools, all things that the church has historically been good at. But now they've forgotten that history and they seem to be looking to social norms and chasing what I would call wokeness. You might disagree on that, but at least I imagine you'd agree that it's looking in the wrong direction.
I think that's right. I mean, I'm a socialist, if your audience hasn't already worked that out. And so obviously my
They won't hold that against you.
Yeah, my particular read, I look at the gospel as actually a message of, in the context of 2,000 years ago in West Asia, of revolutionary justice. Now, some people could say, was that for this world or for the next, and so on, but I think that's the broad message there. And you can go throughout, not just the New Testament, the Old one too, ideas of debt jubilees, like say, helping the poor, feeding the hungry, vanquishing the powerful. So there is very much a political and economic message there of lifting other people up.
Yeah.
And I think you're right, to an extent that's not there anymore. Every couple of years we have Justin... I'm not a big fan of Justin Welby, I have to say. Every couple of years...
I'd like to give some balance, but neither am I.
Yeah, Ofcom might not...
This is turning out to be not so much of a duel.
Yeah. No, but what I don't like about Justin Welby, and it's not my faith, so I don't think it's my business to sort of drop in on this, he talks so much about social justice and so on, but he does so little. He delivers so little. And I don't know, and
he's not here to answer for himself, but we could go into a whole topic on what Justin Welby does and does not do. I'm also running a Twitter poll with the question for you guys: will your Easter celebrations be mostly Christian in theme or entirely secular? Which answers some of the debate that we've just been asking. Can you still be culturally Christian, or do you have to be Christian to celebrate Easter? The poll is open until 7:40 p.m. You still have plenty of time to cast your votes. I will be bringing the results at the end of the programme. Plenty more to come this evening on my Common Sense Crusade, and next we'll be talking to GBNews investigations reporter Charlie Peters about the government's attempt to stamp out grooming gangs and the media's response.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "No, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway, Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Common Sense Crusade with me, Calvin Robinson, on your TV, online and on your wireless. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has vowed to make stamping out grooming gangs a major priority, and himself and Home Secretary Suella Braverman have been outlining their plans to tackle the crisis. It goes without saying that there is a unanimous desire to end the sickening sexual abuse of women and girls, but media reaction to the government's plans has been mixed, to say the least. Let's have a look at some of the newspaper's headlines. A Guardian's article says NSPCC warns against framing grooming gangs problem as ethnically based. One of the headlines in The Independent states, grooming gangs don't just come from one ethnic background, Tories warned. There's a number of examples there. In particular, journalists have been critical of Braverman for outlining the prevalence of Pakistani Muslim rape gangs in the UK. Are Braverman's critics getting their facts right? GB News Investigates reporter Charlie Peters has worked tirelessly to raise awareness about the grooming gang crisis, and he joins me now. Charlie, the media have been more critical, I would say, of Suella Braverman than they were of the grooming gangs themselves. Would you say that's fair?
I'm not sure that's particularly fair. I think when the scandal first erupted in 2012, and most of the focus was on this story, I mean, they were pretty visceral. In fact, it's been very interesting to track the reaction from that time, a decade ago, to this policy now in 2023, the reaction in terms of the language used then and the language used now. In fact, many of the people this week who I think have shamefully let themselves down in the language they've used and the accusations of racism that they've made were 10 years ago using the language that Suella Braverman was using on Sunday when she announced her policy. So, but in terms of the reaction to the story on Monday, and if we just focus on this week, then yes, I think there has been more criticism and more fear about the backlash than the actual problem itself.
Well, was it Adil Ray who compared so-called racist reactions to the report to 9/11 and 7/7, for goodness sake? Talk about hyperbole.
Yeah, well, precisely. And this is a classic trope we have where people are more concerned about a fake backlash that they fear rather than the issue itself. They fear more about some perverse form of vigilante justice arising from the shires, which never actually happens, of course, more than they fear dealing with the problem and pointing out that these disparities exist within society. And this week, there's been a huge fuss in the media, I'm sure you've seen, about Matt Goodwin writing this book called Values, Voice and Virtue, talking about these new elites, these new progressives who coalesce around ideas of progressivism and pro-diversity, pro-immigration. And he's argued that these people will hold enormous amounts of cultural power in the arts and in the charity sector and in journalism as well. And when these issues come up, they do coalesce around the left liberal line. And people have been very upset to be included in this bracket. I mean, Goodwin's come out for a lot of criticism for pointing it out. But in the same week that this has happened, we have had a perfect example of this happening. Loads of people within the charity sector, the NSPCC there, for example, the Runnymede Trust, Adil Ray, loads of other commentators and broadcasters, all saying, you can't possibly talk about this problem, it's racist, and dominating the national conversation, while ordinary Britons who are very concerned about these gangs are sidelined. I think Goodwin's point and the national conversation that I'm trying to have to restart this issue, it's been proven straight away.
Well, Suella Braverman herself said it's not racist to tell the truth. But what I want to get to, Charlie, is what is the biggest impact here? Or you've been tracking this. Is it the diversity, inclusion and equality argument that we have to support diversity and actually addressing this issue would be damaging to diversity? Or is it the fear of the so-called far right that I don't think actually exist at the moment, but we should be fearful that they will exist if we keep burying this under the carpet?
I think it's predominantly the former. I mean, in the year-long investigation I took into this crisis, we found an example of one man called Maruf Hussain, who was a Labour minister in the Rotherham Council throughout the noughties. He had to resign in 2015. He was the community cohesion minister, and he was accused in the Casey report of deflecting investigations into Pakistani taxi drivers. And he made a false accusation of racism against a Labour member. And he did this, it's alleged, because, and many survivors have told me, he prioritised social cohesion over the security and safety of young women and girls. That one example is replicated in many other places. Now, Maruf Hussain, we found in January, was still working in the public sector, now as a diversity manager in the NHS. And so these things, the lessons have not been learned. When this huge crisis erupted, there was a rush to defend diversity and the political attachments to progressivism more than there was a keenness to stamp out this problem. And that is why it is still going on today.
Well, I see two problems there. One, that it seems the fear of being accused of racist or being racist, or the fear of racism, is what's enabled this problem to persist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's also been, I think, quite a lot of political attachment to that problem.
Yeah.
I mean, the reaction we've seen very aggressively against Braverman has, of course, predominantly come from the opposition. The Labour Party reacted most vociferously to this. I mean, Tracy Brabham, the West Yorkshire mayor, said it was dog whistle politics. Other commentators on the left have made similar accusations. And I think the political issue here, that the problem that dealing with child abuse has been politicised so much, has meant that it's been very tough for everyone to come together and support an honest and direct approach to dealing with this problem. I mean, I'm very glad that Aaron's here, for example, because when I broke a story in December about the Labour Party selecting a parliamentary candidate who was forced to resign in 2015 from that same report, I think, as I told him this week, Aaron was the only noticeably left-wing commentator who shared that GBNews story, because everyone else thought it was, too embarrassing, or they didn't want to be associated with the channel. They have their reasons, I don't know. And that kind of divide has definitely hampered our response to this problem.
Well, thank you for that segue, Charlie. Let's bring Aaron in. Aaron, do you think many people on your side of the political divide are too fearful of being associated with people on the right, that they're not addressing this very important matter?
I think that's probably true. I think it's probably true more broadly in politics, and I think it works both ways, by the way. I think there are many people on the right that wouldn't share an article from Novara Media because, But I think it was exceptionally good journalism, that particular piece, with regards to the councillor there. What I would say, just it's a question for you, I suppose, is the left, or people on the left, would make the counter-argument, which is, statistically, certain kinds of child sexual abuse, where they're done in this way, it's more likely to be people from a certain ethnic background. However, the reality of child sexual abuse in this country is, I think, a quarter of people who are victims of it, the perpetrator is a family member. And I think something like 93% of people who are victims, this is the NSPCC, they know the person who's done it. And I suppose the concern is, and it's a shame because we're not having a more sort of structured, informed debate around this, I think some of those people are actually trying to say to you, you're mischaracterising the nature of child sexual abuse, which is often in the home, often perpetrated by individuals, family members, etc. And instead, what we're seeing is a sort of social psychology of this is done by large groups of men who are often from ethnic minorities, which isn't an accurate picture of child sexual abuse. No. So maybe that's what they're saying to you and it's not being communicated clearly?
If they are doing that, they're doing it very disingenuously, because my journalism, my investigation has always been about on-street grooming gangs in particular. I think this is a portion, it is a small portion of child abuse, that's true, but it's a portion that I think has avoided the most scrutiny and successful approaches being implemented by government and regional bodies, the police, local authorities. I think there is a widespread societal shameful failure to deal with child abuse in general. Most of it happens online. The NCA, its specialist officers, they are struggling because they aren't resourced properly. It's an issue we don't deal with in general particularly well. But on that particular point of child sex grooming gangs, that is where there is additional sensitivities and additional resistance to dealing with the problem. And that is what I've been critical of. And I think the government announcement on Wednesday was about clamping down on grooming gangs, not clamping down on child abuse. It was about a very specific and targeted form. And people want to widen the debate. They can do that, but we should also make sure we hammer that problem as well.
Emma, we've talked about commentators and journalists and people looking at this problem from the outside, but do you think racism or fear of racism has also been used as a shield by the perpetrators themselves, by the people on the Labour councils, by the taxi driver companies, by people who will use it as a weapon to say, you cannot accuse me of this because you're racist?
I think that if you have sort of certain weaknesses, whether those weaknesses are in law or in culture, there are going to be people who will take the mick. Who will use those sort of weak spots and exploit them in order to do bad things. And actually, it sounds like it's tangential, but I don't think it is. That actually there's a sort of parallel problem to this, which is issues surrounding women and Sharia law and women being discriminated against within Muslim communities. Because when I used to do research on this issue with Muslim women, and almost universally those Muslim women told me that they felt the government weren't doing anything because they were afraid of being accused of Islamophobia. So I think that this also points to a more general problem, that fear of being called Islamophobic, fear of being called racist, fear of being called transphobic in all sorts of sensitive areas are preventing justice from being done. And when we're talking about vulnerable children, when we're talking about women who are stuck within communities that are seriously abusing them and preventing them from having access to their rights, I think that that's a serious injustice. We need people like Charlie to be very, very straightforward and specific in naming the problem, not talking about abstracts, not trying to get out of it by making generalisations and by intentionally missing the point. I think we need people to be courageous, to name things for what they are, and to point out those people who are taking the mick and to not be afraid to do so.
Yeah. You've got time to answer that if you'd like to, Charlie.
Well, I think I agree. I mean, I want more people doing the same work as me. I mean, I was stunned while conducting my investigation how many of these kind of scoops and scalps I could walk into because there just weren't other people looking in this space. I mean, a lot of the journalism I've conducted since I started this investigation was pretty entry-level stuff. I mean, people just, have a go journos could have done the same thing. Much more of it, though, was about dealing with survivors and having them all, gaining their trust, and that's significantly more delicate. And anyone who does want to do this work has to focus on that. And I think that's a discussion we've missed out on this week by focusing on these false accusations of racism, by starting this culture war fight over the language used. What we should have done instead is spend more time speaking to and listening to survivors who will point out the problem as it is, as they did when they met the Prime Minister and Sarah Brabham on Monday, and I spoke to them afterwards, rather than flapping around with this fake, concocted, silly political correctness.
Absolutely. Thank you, Charlie Peters, for your investigation. And thank you to my panel for a wonderful discussion on that. I think we need to keep calling out these people who are afraid of having the conversation because it's so important. Plenty more to come this evening on my Common Sense Crusade. Next, we'll be talking to Bishop Andy Lyons about the Church of England going woke and how Gafcon could be the solution.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island's story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back to the Common Sense Crusade with me, the Reverend Calvin Robinson, on your TV, online and on your wireless. Now later this month, I'll be going to Kigali, Rwanda, for the global Gafcon 4 conference. As well as discussing how the worldwide church moves ahead in the 2020s, there's sure to be discussion of how the Anglican Communion can work with the Church of England going forward. The Church of England has been head of the Anglican Communion since 1534, but that will end this year, after nearly half a millennium. Bishop Andy Lyons is the chairman of Gafcon Great Britain and Europe, and he joins me now to discuss the conference. Bishop Andy, first of all, thank you for joining us on a Holy Saturday. I know you're probably one of the busiest people in the country right now. When will you be going over to Kigali, and what is your idea for Gafcon 4?
Thank you. Just to correct, I'm not the chairman of Gafcon, but I am a trustee. I'm going across on Friday, Lord willing, and I'm looking forward to being in Kigali from Saturday morning.
What are you expecting to be discussed there?
Well, Gafcon is a movement which seeks to return the Anglican Communion to its biblical roots, and as well as the pandemic, which of course has played havoc with communications and things. So I think it's really important that bishops, clergy, other clergy and laity meet together for the first time for many years. But obviously, as well as God's great mission agenda of seeing his salvation reach to the ends of the earth, the very things that we're celebrating this Easter, also, obviously, they will be discussing their response to what the House of Bishops of the Church of England and the General Synod have recently indicated.
Well, how significant is this for the Anglican Communion? Since many primates within Gafcon and the Global South have said they're now in impaired communion with the CFE.
Yeah, I think the timing is remarkable, actually. So it was planned, because we have one every 5 years, and this was planned some time ago. But the timing is very auspicious, bearing in mind that what happened in January with the House of Bishops and then the February General Synod. And I think this is a key moment for those provinces, both of the Global South Fellowship of Anglicans, but also the Gafcon movement more widely. And there's a lot of overlap between the two. I think it's really important that they meet together at this stage and just determine their response.
Well, Bishop Andy, as one of the trustees of Gafcon GBE and as the Bishop of Anglican Mission in England, what options do you have to offer for people who think they are lost within the Church of England, or the Church of England has left them behind?
Well, I also speak as the regional secretary responsible to the general secretary of Gafcon and advising him, that's Archbishop Ben Quashie, on events going on in the region of Europe. Obviously, one of the key things I'm speaking of is as the presiding bishop of the Anglican Network in Europe with AME, the Anglican Mission in Europe, in England, and the Anglican Convocation Europe. And we are seeking to provide a home for those who seek and need our help, as happened in 2017 when the Scottish Episcopal Church made moves in the same direction as the Church of England is now doing, and then more recently the Church in Wales. And so we are seeking to provide a home as well as hold out the hope in Christ to this needy continent.
Well, thank you very much. That was Bishop Andy Lyons. Thanks for your time today. I'll see you in Kigali. Well, let's see what my dualists make of all that before we go any further. I've got my sidekick next to me, Emma Webb. You know, obviously, I'm a member of Gafcon. My church is part of Gafcon. I'm the Free Church of England, a separate convocation to what Bishop Andy Lyons is a member of. But we're trying to offer an alternative. Do you think things like that are necessary right now?
It's very tempting to me. Listening to him speaking there, I was thinking maybe this is something that I should be interested in. I think that it's, even for those who are still within the Church of England, I think that it's very helpful to see that there is, a worldwide Anglican communion that is holding true to the traditions, and as he was saying, going back to biblical traditions, really holding on to the traditional doctrine of the Anglican communion and of Christianity in general, worldwide, across the board. I think that is a comfort to many people within the Church of England. I expect that it will attract a lot of people away from the Church of England and cause those numbers to dwindle even more. But it's good for people to have a sense that there is an option. And I think the reason for that is because, as we saw with what happened to you, Calvin, the Church of England is seemingly purging from its own ranks anybody who is even slightly conservative in their understanding of doctrine and tradition. And so feeling, helping people to not feel completely alienated from the church, from Christianity in general, I think that Gafcon is providing a service to those people, whether or not they stay in the Church of England.
Thank you. Aaron, just to bring you up to speed, Gafcon represents about 80% of the Anglican communion around the world. So the COV is small scale compared, but obviously historically it has the prestige of being the Church of England. Now, we remain Orthodox, and the Church of England is pushing a more modern idea of the Church onto those other countries. Do you think this is a new form of colonialism, when the Church of England is saying, actually, you guys in Africa need to catch up with societal norms and allow same-sex blessings and all the stuff that we're doing too, because you guys are old-fashioned now?
Well, I mean, that's the history of the Church of England, if you don't mind me saying, in parts of the global south, isn't it? I mean, so that's not necessarily a surprise. I think there's probably a good argument for that, in so much as the social mores of one country not applying necessarily to another. But I would add, I think the quintessential problem here for the Church of England is, that like I've said before, the relationship to the state. And ultimately, we live in a relatively secular, liberal society, nation-state, the United Kingdom. King Charles III is the head of the Church of England. So I think you're in a particular bind here. It's a very unique set of circumstances. But like you say, these aren't really things that religious communities in the global south are really pursuing. You see it more in the US, I think, with Episcopal churches sort of leading the way. And they say, actually, to people such as yourself, follow the path that we've laid down. But when it comes to the global south, it's rather different. I think it's obviously it's a bad look if you have people in Britain, Europe, necessarily telling people in sub-Saharan Africa how they should live their lives. However, at the same time, that shouldn't be infringing on people's human rights. And again, maybe this is something we disagree on, but I think there are certain fundamental human rights. I think somebody has the fundamental right to live with a partner of their choosing. I think at the same time, you have to balance religious freedoms and say, well, if the church isn't going to necessarily, acknowledge that as religiously acceptable, then, it's a balancing act. But as long as people aren't being targeted and harassed and intimidated and violated on the basis of their sexual preferences, I think that's permissible. I think the church's business is their business.
Fantastic. Well, let's see what our viewers are saying. Before we move on to the final break, let's have a look at what you've had to say about what we're talking about today. On our Easter special, thank you for the comments on the Easter special, by the way. I'm glad some of you seem to enjoy that. Lots of emails were popping through. Thank you, Calvin, from Christina, for a very enjoyable programme. It showed us the true meaning of Easter. Your choice of guests was exceptional, and the hymns took me right back to my school days. Thank you and God bless. No, thank you, Christina. God bless you. Kath said, hi, GB News. I just want to let you know that my teenage daughter now wants to go to an Easter service after seeing Emma and Calvin on your programme. Thank you all for everything you are doing. Oh, that is so lovely to hear. Thank you, Kath. Thank you for all of your comments. Please do keep them coming in. We do see them. We do read them all. And thank you to my dualists this week, Emma Webb and Aaron Bastani. We will see them both again very, very soon. Coming up in the final part of my Common Sense Crusade this week, we'll be talking about the worrying news that more than a quarter of churches no longer hold weekly services.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Doobs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Common Sense Crusade with me, the Reverend Calvin Robinson, on your TV, online and on your wireless. Earlier today, I took to Twitter and asked, will your Easter celebrations be mostly Christian in theme or entirely secular? Here's the result of the polls, and 66.1% of you said you'd celebrate in traditional Christian ways, and 33.9% of you said that you would have a secular observance. That is actually very surprising. Most polls I do on here are 90-10, so that is the closest one we've seen in a long time. Thank you for taking part in my Twitter poll. Now, let's move on to a similar topic, our final topic of the day. A report has found that a decline of more than 20% in church service attendance compared to pre-pandemic times may have more to do with a lack of services than a drop in potential worshippers. Statisticians in the Diocese of Oxford have built up a picture which suggests that for the first time in the Church of England's history, more than a quarter of churches do not hold a service every Sunday. To discuss this, I'm delighted to welcome author, former chaplain to Queen Elizabeth II and great friend of the show, Dr. Gavin Ashenden. Dr. Gavin Ashenden, thank you very much for joining us on Holy Saturday. What do you think is going on here? Why is there a massive appearance of a drop in numbers due to services, not necessarily the faithful?
Calvin, thank you for having me on, and happy Easter to you and everyone. There are complex reasons behind this, but I think if one was to choose an overriding causal reason, I would say that, obviously there aren't enough clergy, there aren't enough people, but there hasn't been enough faith. One of the things we haven't had particularly from the Church of England, are leaders speaking out about the distinctiveness of Christianity, as opposed to a kind of liberal humanism, which mimics Radio 4 and that kind of culture. So it's too few people and too little conviction and courage.
Well, until 2019, it was also a legal requirement, wasn't it, for churches to hold a service on a Sunday? And I think they dropped that. That seems to be a mistake in my eyes. But why, upon dropping that, would the number of services therefore drop too? Is that because of, like you say, a lack of faith, or is it just lack of resources? I know of many, and I'm sure you know of many vicars and priests that have been made responsible for benefices of like 14 churches, which is totally unmanageable, isn't it?
Well, it really is. It's this complete change from being a parish priest to being a manager of monuments. And the poor clergy of the Church of England have got no chance whatsoever. It's not just that they have 4 buildings, some of them, or 6 buildings. They have 4 PCCs, 4 central committees. The legalism, the safeguarding, the paperwork make being an apostle of Christ and a shepherd of believers almost impossible to deliver. And so the problem is, for as long as they continue to try and make the system work with fewer resources, you have a vicious circle, and people lose whatever confidence they had in the first place. But the really important thing is this belief in Christ and the belief that lives can be transformed. That's where you start, but that seems to be at the bottom of the list.
I think a solution might be, I might suggest that, for example, the Church Commission, which has, what, £10 billion worth of assets, could divert some of those assets to parishes to make sure that every parish does have a parish priest and people aren't overworked and aren't trying to manage multiple parishes at once. That might be a solution. I don't know if it's practical, but that might be a solution. What do you think might be a solution?
No, I think it's completely practical. We know already that Archbishop Welby, who is a very competent manager of organisations, has managed to persuade the Church Commissioners to change their rules to allow him to dip into their enormous funds for his own projects. The trouble is, this is not a bad idea, but the projects haven't produced anything. I think the Church of England's in its last death throes, and if they have £10 billion, I would spend it all on an enormous evangelistic exercise to try and take the burden of administration off the backs of the clergy. One last gasp, tell our community about the wondrous, the good news of Jesus, rather than to sink into this awful swamp of maladministration.
And in our last 30 seconds, Gavin, what are you going to be doing for Vigil tonight and or Mass in the morning?
In 5 minutes' time, I'm leaping off to the Vigil Mass tonight. Then I shall go to a 9 o'clock service in the morning. Then I'm going to have a massive slap-up breakfast to celebrate the resurrection joy of Easter, and spend the rest of the day being so grateful that death is not the end, forgiveness is unlimited. All our lives have the most profound meaning, and thanks to Christ for doing it all for us.
Well, God bless you. Have a wonderful Easter. Thank you very much. That was author and former Church of England priest Gavin Ashington. Each week on this show, we like to end with our closing prayer. Here is the Collect of Easter Even. Grant, O Lord, that as we Grant, O Lord, that as we are baptized into the death of thy blessed Son, our Saviour, Jesus Christ, so by continual mortifying our corrupt affections, we may be buried with him, and that through the grave and gate of death, we may pass on to our joyful resurrection, for his merits, who died and was buried and rose again for us, thy Son, Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. You have been watching Calvin's Common Sense Crusade with me, the Reverend Calvin Robinson. Do not forget, our Easter special airs again tomorrow at 6 p.m, and then I'll be back with you guys next week on Saturday at 7 p.m. Up next, it's the Saturday 5. Before that, it's your weather forecast. Have an absolutely wonderful Easter. God bless you all. Thank you very much. Deus Vult.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Hope you've been enjoying the Easter weekend so far. There has been plenty of fine weather, and we'll continue to see More of that into Sunday. There are fronts out in the Atlantic that are slowly going to make their progress towards the UK, but high pressure is keeping them at bay for the moment, keeping things fairly fine and settled. Just a bit more of a breeze across western areas, and that will be strengthening as we head throughout the rest of this evening and through tonight. But many of us will remain dry and with some clear intervals. Some low cloud pushing into parts of eastern England and Scotland as well, maybe a few fog patches around, but with the breeze and the increasing cloud, temperatures won't drop too far. Most towns and cities will hold up around 5 or 6 degrees Celsius. Could be a bit of a murky start again in the east, but as the breeze again strengthens here, that should hopefully help lift some of that cloud out of the way. And most of England, Wales and Scotland should see some sunny intervals throughout the day. The sunshine, though, will be turning hazy as this cloud from the west pushes in, and we'll see some outbreaks of rain into Northern Ireland later on. Temperatures climbing up compared to Saturday, around 16 to 18 degrees Celsius, but in that strengthening breeze, it will just take the edge off the feel of things. It's into the overnight period where we'll start to see that rain push more widely across the rest of the UK. Could be some heavier bursts on that across Scotland into parts of northern England as well. Then as we head into the early part of Monday, it will be clearing its way off the far southeast, potentially just lingering here for a little while throughout the morning and into the start of the afternoon. Behind that, though, many of us will see a barrage of showers push their way in on Monday, and some of those could be heavy at times with the risk of some hail and thunder, and generally that sets us up for the scene of some unsettled weather throughout the rest of the week. We do have our eyes on this area of low pressure that could bring some slightly stronger winds